generally the price follows what they're doing given, enough time.
Sure.
So when you talk about this group of holders, they've added about 108,450 Bitcoin over the past 6 weeks. That's almost 1% addition just in 6 weeks. So that's a massive amount. They're looking pretty confident at the moment. And I don't see that changing until...
Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me is Brian from Santiment. And as you all know, we are going to do a deep dive into the metrics around Bitcoin and certain altcoins to see what is happening in this crypto market and what may come next. Brian, great to see you.
Good to see you, Tony. It's nice to be back, and I'm excited to talk about a month's worth of crypto as we saw another all-time high here.
You know, you went away a bit on vacation. I think it was good timing because September was pretty brutal. But most recently, Bitcoin started picking up and we saw a major rally to new all-time highs. So it seems like Q4, we're starting to gain momentum here.
Yeah. And, everyone's obviously trying to figure out what the rest of the year is going to look like. We were talking before we started recording about how despite the all-time high, we didn't see that, euphoric over the top FOMO spike that we have in the past. And I think a lot of it is people just aren't quite sure what to make of the inching up, inching down, being in quite like this tight range that we've been in. But a lot is going to depend on the Fed rate cuts and some other factors related to what the whales are doing. So we'll jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can kick it off with Bitcoin sentiment, how people have been feeling and looking at Bitcoin, because to your point, there hasn't been much euphoria, even though we're hitting new highs. And then Bitcoin really just a couple $1,000s higher. It had the high it previously set. So maybe that's why, right? People are like, I don't know. There's a bit of disbelief here. I didn't see Bitcoin pump to 135K. I saw it just cross over the all-time high by a couple $1,000s.
Exactly, right? There's a big difference between Bitcoin, hitting that 112K mark like it did back in January, right before Trump was elected. People went nuts there, right? Because they're like, oh, it's the Trump pump. This is just the beginning. And then because there was so much euphoria, it ended up marking a huge top and we just tumbled for the next 3 months until we hit that pain point in early April with the tariff announcements and all that. This time, it's like we just crept above. You can see here in mid-August, getting to about 123. I think we were at like 123.8 in total. And then here we got up to about 125.8, at least on Coinbase. That's what we saw as the high. So it was just a little $2,000 inch above the last all-time high, which was pretty recent, less than 2 months ago. So it didn't quite feel like the same celebratory FOMO fest that we've seen in the past. And you can see, this gold line here, as we've gone over in previous videos, represents the ratio of all the bullish comments versus all the bearish comments. And as you'd imagine, when we get super bullish, that tends to be when we see tops. When we get super bearish, that tends to be when we see bottoms. And there really wasn't much of anything here. We saw something a little at the beginning of October, didn't impact prices much because it's not nearly as euphoric as some of these previous ones. And then the all-time high happened here, and it was like a modest, like run-of-the-mill type of reaction from the crypto audience.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think there's, like we were mentioning earlier, some disbelief, and then you couple that with some macro factors, and then September was so brutal, right? After Bitcoin hit that high in August, there was the big pullback, and it got even worse in September. So I think people are a little bit jaded, like, I don't know, is this a fake out? Is it a bull trap? And that type of thing.
Right. Exactly. From a percentage standpoint, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Like if we actually go from, the previous all-time high until right before the rally at the end of late September, Bitcoin dropped 11%. I think if anything, it was brutal for people because of the lack of movement when they thought we were going to see a huge rally. So it was like a big defeating of expectations. And then, of course, October happens. And so far, October has matched with its name, and people have been excited about it. Part of that was due to the late September confirmation that we were going to get rate cuts. And now we're back in this position where we're waiting for the next rate cut. the probable outcome, according to Polymarket and other news sources, is we see 2 more rate cuts of 25 BPS. That's what we had back in September. We expect the same in October and I believe November. Either November or December. But regardless, that should fuel crypto up a little higher because crypto is again partnered with tech stocks in particular, but the S&P 500 in general, as you can see illustrated here, has really correlated tightly with Bitcoin going all the way back to 2022, really, when those Fed hikes were starting to ease the COVID cuts that had happened. So 3.5 years now, we've seen this green and blue line representing Bitcoin and S&P 500 respectively, just kind of partnering and going a little above, a little below each other, but eventually playing catch up and staying very tightly correlated. So the idea is more rate cuts will continue to fuel the US economy and by an extension, world economies. And because Bitcoin's so tightly correlated, we continue to see some all-time highs there, barring we don't get any surprises with these rate cuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Could we take a look at the Bitcoin MVRV? I'm curious how that's playing out. I remember you sharing that chart many times, and I'm finally starting to grasp the concept of it. And I've been watching it closely. If Bitcoin is above market value or below, and things like that.
Totally, yeah. I mean, the big cliff notes with MVRV is you don't want it to be too high above 0% if you're looking to buy or hold. You want it to be below 0%, especially the short term and the long term. If they're both below together, great sign that Bitcoin is undervalued and you're getting in at a historic point where most people are in pain. Therefore, it has a greater chance of rallying. So right now, we see both lines a little above 0%. That being said, they're not in any sort of crazy danger zone. Like here, you can see mid-July when the 30-day MVRV was at plus 12%, 365-day was above 30%. That was a sign that we were a little overheated. And sure enough, we end up slipping down quite a bit until we end up hitting a bottom in early August. So where we are now, 30-day MVRV is about plus 2.5%. So call that essentially even. There's really, unless you get an above 10%, it's a pretty negligible diversion. The 365-day MVRV is at about plus 15%, which does signal a bit of caution, right? We just hit our all-time high 3 days ago before this recording. So I would expect that there could be a little more, maybe 1 to 2 days more of cooling off, maybe people buying the dip a little too ambitiously right now. They get punished. I won't say an exact price level that you should buy in because frankly, we don't really do things that way. I know TA traders have support levels, resistance levels. We believe in them too, but Santiment's metrics are all about valuation, actual on-chain metrics, how the greed and fear are dictating the current position that we're in. So it's showing me that we probably could retrace a little bit more. And if we get this orange line back down to 0 or a little below 0, boom, that's an ideal time to buy. You see what happened last time it did just about 2 weeks ago. So this would be the ideal buy zone.
Yeah, this is such a great metric, man. And like I said, as I've been paying attention to it more, studying it more, I'm seeing those cyclical patterns and how this all correlates with sentiment and much more. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because Bitcoin obviously has gone up, tens of thousands of percentage points over the past decade in price, but the zero-sum game remains intact because there's always people that are panic selling, taking a huge loss, and there are people who take profit too early, and there's people who make mistakes all the time that allow Bitcoin's price to keep going up and have an average of 0% when it comes to wins and losses, despite the hodlers that have just sat on their Bitcoin for the last decade being up tens of thousands of percentage points.
Oh, yeah. And on that note, what are the whales doing? I've been looking at the chart and I see just mass accumulation, if I'm reading it right.
Yep. It's looking great, to be honest. Some of the most consistent accumulation I've seen in quite a while, actually. if we just go to this point in late August, August 27th until now, call it roughly the past 6 weeks, they've added about 100. When I say they, I'm referring to smart money wallets that we call anywhere ranging between 10 BTC held all the way up to 10,000 BTC held. And this group holds almost precisely about 2/3 of all Bitcoin. Generally, the price follows what they're doing given, enough time.
Sure.
So when you talk about this group of holders, they've added about 108,450 Bitcoin over the past 6 weeks. That's almost 1% addition just in 6 weeks. So that's
Wow.
a massive amount. They're looking pretty confident at the moment. And I don't see that changing until, they get relayed some signal that the Fed rate cuts won't happen. And right now, just like us, they have the same information. And that is that we are going to continue to see some rate cuts that will stimulate the S&P 500 further.
Yeah, man. You look at this and there's not as many ebbs and flows. It's just like a straight trend line up. Well, relatively straight. But yeah, to your point of over this past year, there's been some pretty big peaks and valleys. This is just like accumulate, which is interesting.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of news, right, over the first 9 or so, 10 or so months of Trump's tenure. Tariffs caused a lot of uncertainty. It doesn't matter if you're a whale or not. You don't know what his tariffs truly mean. So people are, taking profit, accumulating on the dips, all sorts of stuff. War in the Middle East or potential war. The resolution that was just announced where Israel and Palestine are supposedly putting things on pause. We don't get into the politics of it, but we do get into the market reactions of this news and the reports. And both retail and institutional traders alike are pretty happy with the news that, the potential of a world war goes down a few ticks when you hear about Middle East resolutions. So all of this combined has led to a bit of a state of calmness where really the only major thing on the radar, I'm not saying there isn't other news, but the only major thing is really the Fed and making sure that rates get cut to ensure further growth.
And it's fascinating, Brian, because we were looking at MVRV recently, just a minute ago, and if you look at the point of when these whales really started picking up their accumulation, it's when Bitcoin came down from that correction from its all-time high hit in August. So doing the opposite of the retail herd, right, who started getting panicking, bored, worried about government shutdown, worried about this and that. They're just accumulating, man, from that August, like end of August into September, when everybody is like, oh my God, it's over, the top is in, and much more.
That's a great point. Yeah, even just this 12-day stretch after that August all-time high, they accumulated about 30,000 more Bitcoin after Bitcoin dropped about 11% here. So as the retail was panicking and dropping their coins, guess who was scooping them up? So, and then something happened here. I'm not sure about this. Maybe something in the news cycle in late August. I can't quite remember. But after that, and we've had this final little drop down and Bitcoin gets close to about 108K, they've just been on blast off mode ever since.
Incredible. So on the other side of the token, what do the ETF inflows look like?
Yeah, so we actually just reported on it yesterday, but we've had about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 straight days now of major inflows coming in. Like this latest day was actually the lowest amount of inflows, and that was about $440 million. This peak here on October 6th, it's actually going to be one day after what is showing on my mouse cursor here. But October 6th had over $1.16 billion that day alone in inflows, which was interesting because it was the top. This was the day of the all-time high here, and then we retraced. So it's an interesting thing when it comes to inflows. I still theorize in the long term, more inflows into Bitcoin ETFs is objectively a good thing. But when you see the massive spikes, like here and here, here, there's exceptions. But when I see the hugest inflows, I actually tend to see a lot of tops coming. It's kind of like the initial inflows, like here, help stimulate the rally, and then the highest day, like if you get over $1 billion all of a sudden in one day, that's when you see a sudden retrace. So it's a little bit of a tricky one in terms of price correlation. I think it's nowadays so many retailers are in ETFs in addition to the institutionals that it isn't just whales driving these inflows and outflows anymore.
Yeah, that's true. And to your point of seeing this on the chart, could a local top be forming right here before a true breakout to, higher highs? That's a possibility. We'll have to wait and see how the data continues to play out.
Yeah, and arguably maybe we already did see that all-time our local top, and now we're gonna kind of go into a bit of a bull and bear battle for a few days. Like I said, the MVRV getting below zero would be great, and then we might resume plenty of inflows coming in, and we get another one of these kinds of rallies. So I think that's what a lot of us are hoping for.
Oh, for sure. And then even if, for example, like the ebbs and flows of the inflows, I know I said a lot of flows there. If you look at April, right, with the big spikes, the price kept going up. There was a pullback, then there was additional spikes, and we ran up to new highs. So it doesn't mean that, as you mentioned, just maybe a micro local top pullback, then we keep going. Like that can happen. Yeah,
I agree. I think there are better leading indicators, right, than this. Like MVRV, I would rely on more, but I think this is more of like a almost like a utility measure, right? It's the amount of people who believe in the long term of Bitcoin, and the more money that's coming into it over the long run, the more crypto in general has a place to stay for the indefinite future.
Oh, absolutely. All right, let's jump to some altcoins. Let's look at Ethereum and what you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, let's start with Ethereum's MVRV like we just did for Bitcoin here. So Ethereum's actually looking a little better than Bitcoin in terms of its short-term MVRV. Obviously, it's stayed in that range in the kind of 4,500 to 4,800 range. I think it got up to 4,831 or so back in August and hasn't quite been able to reach a higher high since. So you can see over here on the far right, the 30-day MVRV in orange is about negative 2.5%. The long-term MVRV, representing the average returns of traders that have been active in the past year, is still pretty high at plus 26%. So this is a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde metric where you can probably justify adding onto your position for a short-term swing trade, but you still want to be a little cautious if you're planning on, expecting a 3 to 5x in Ethereum over the next year, while so many people have already profited and gotten that 3x in something like the past 6 months or so.
Interesting. And then, what is the sentiment around Ethereum? Are people feeling bearish? Are they frustrated about it? I'm curious about that because I think if you remember early in the year, people were like, "Oh, Ethereum is dead; it's not moving," and all that.
Yeah, great question. I mean, that was what we were reporting on back here in April. Like Ethereum's negativity was super prominent, and then all of a sudden we get a rally, and finally we start to see that euphoria later. But now we're starting to see some of that familiar negativity, not quite to the same level of FUD where there were like more bearish comments than bullish comments on a daily basis. That's a pretty big sign that we are seeing a bottom pretty soon, which, by the way, XRP is seeing a lot of that. And we posted about the fact that XRP is seeing a lot of FUD. But at least Ethereum's mood is starting to look a little more gloomy again, which is a good sign.
Yeah.
Retailers are probably a little impatient moving on to the next greatest thing because they think that the rally's over. So that, again, I think could fuel some short-term good results. But again, the long-term, because there's been such a rally already and there have been so many realized profits among Ethereum traders, we may see a little bit of a cool down even with the negative sentiment becoming more prominent again.
Brian, back in the day when I wasn't educated about these things, I would have looked at the sentiment as like, oh man, this doesn't look good. It doesn't mean ETH is going to pump. But now I use it as a contrarian indicator.
Of
I
course.
want it to be fear. I want it to be people that get discouraged and depressed, because we've seen it time and time again. You have the reverse happening.
Yeah, because when you first get into crypto, you see all these KOLs with millions of followers, and you're like, these guys have to be such geniuses. They know exactly what they're talking about. Oftentimes, they're just like us. Then maybe they have innocent, analysis in mind that they just want to share with the community. Maybe they're intentionally sharing stuff so they can do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of all of this chatter, like 90 something percent of it, is coming from very tiny traders who are just speculating about the price. And what do the majority of very tiny traders end up getting as results? Losses. So that's why they are really the perfect contrarian indicator when you look at them as a whole and all of their comments about Bitcoin, Ethereum, what have you.
You mentioned XRP. Maybe we can just jump to that, because to your point, you're seeing very similar sentiment, a lot of negativity and things like that.
Yeah. So we reported on it when we saw this and this. These were like the two most negative spikes we've seen all year on XRP. And yes, it's continued to fall a bit, mostly because crypto's retraced just over the past 3 days. But the fact is, XRP's overall sentiment, just eyeballing an average sentiment since April, it's definitely going like this, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting less and less positive comments relative to negative comments. And that means people's moods have soured on the number 3 market cap. And they're going to be results oriented, of course. Many people might still be long-term very bullish on XRP, and we don't have anything bad to say about XRP. We think we know their team well, and they're very impressive in what they're always working on. But the fact of the matter is, if we go back to mid-July here to now, their price has dropped about 22.5%, and that's going to, of course, result in retail traders starting to get a bit sour on it.
Yeah, and then you take into consideration BNB just took the number 3 spot away from XRP, so the sentiment.
Good point.
They're starting to panic, right?
And XRP is actually showing at number 5 now. So I just said number 3. I think Tether's at number 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
So if we go to, let's do a quick check on that. Tether's showing as number 3. Maybe it's 1 day delayed or something, but either way.
Sure.
Tether and BNB are going to be very close in market cap right now. And if we look at BNB, which I know we wanted to touch on, look at this price trajectory. Just absolutely insane since the tariffs started to make crypto great again, right? So their price, if I can grab the very edge here and see the percentage, even after this small retrace, yeah, they've more than 2x'd, about plus 114% in the past 6 months. But look at their sentiment. It really isn't doing anything special. It's such an ignored asset compared to some of the other top caps. Solana, SWI, Chainlink, XRP, Cardano, they all get so much more discussion and speculation and social media debate compared to BNB, which is just kind of known as Binance's native token. So it's quietly going up, Tony. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that because, and I think, who was I talking to about this? A friend, because they were like, oh, it's ripping and all that, but it's not like Solana or Ethereum or something where the people are actually building their communities, there are memes, there are whatever, right? It's an exchange token, and that's kind of boring. Like, okay, we know it's Binance's token. And then you think about just about maybe a year ago, there was a lot of regulatory uncertainty, right? Before Trump came into office, and people were like, yeah, I don't know if we want to touch Binance because they just settled, right? And CZ went to jail and all that stuff. So there's not much to be excited about, even though if you're holding the asset, you're making money, depending on your entry price, of course. But it's not, there's no appeal outside of, okay, the asset went up. It's not like a community or anything like that.
Exactly. But when you see an ascension like this, regardless of the gold line here, kind of looking underwhelming, when I highlight the positive sentiment, look at that big green spike that happened right as it made that all-time high. and even the negative sentiment was exploding, to a lesser extent, of course, but both were just through the roof here. And that was indicative that we were at least finally getting it on the radars of some traders who normally ignore it. And that is very often a signal of a local top. It's a little faint to see, but like you can see the green line here correlating with that local top back in late July perfectly.
Sure.
This one was a couple days before the local top. And then this one right here nailed it. So sometimes it's less about the ratio of bullish versus bearish. And you just look at the overall amount of positive commentary flowing in. And you can go, well, I think retail has latched onto this coin. I better take a step aside until they cool their jets a little bit.
Yeah. And, we've talked a lot about in this market, every dog has its day, right? We've seen Solana, the early stages of this bull market, lead and just run up. XRP Q4 2024, right? With the Gensler SEC narrative, ETH grabbing the mantle a bit, and now it's BNB. So it's like these top 10 coins can all go through that cycle. And look, there's other coins that have this, but we're talking about the most liquid assets in the market cap. But they will all have their day running up, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's been such a cyclical year. You've seen meme coins have their moment in the sun, AI and big data. Lately, privacy coins. I just put an article out. You guys can check it out on our insights page, all about Monero and some of these privacy tokens that have ascended just in October itself. All of these tokens have their moment in the sun. If we talked about Ethereum at the beginning of the year, people were laughing at it, right? Yeah. And now we're looking at it like, oh, of course it's the number 2 market cap asset. It's Bitcoin Junior. It's always going to be one of the most dominant forces. But people were already writing it off and going, oh, it's eventually not even going to be in the top 10 less than a year ago.
Yep. I remember that. It was so bad, man. I don't think I've ever seen it that bad for ETH. Really quick, is there an MVRV for BNB and even XRP that you can share?
That's a good question. I'll just check live on camera. I don't mind. But I think because BNB is not an ETH-based asset, we're going to be more limited. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have average returns. The best we really have is that sentiment I showed, as well as funding rate we can look at, which is looking pretty modest. So this is a good, sentiment gauge, because you can actually see how many people are putting their money where their mouth is and riding up the rally. And it doesn't look like it's anything too special at the moment. So sentiment is pretty tempered, which is a good sign. Funding rate is pretty tempered, which is a good sign. And I'm just checking to see the overall discussion rate. Yeah, as you can see, it made up over 5% of discussions on the day it topped out on Monday. And since then, it's starting to come down, but that's still a lot of social dominance for a token that's normally not talked about very much. If there is a good signal we have on Santiment right now for it, besides sentiment, it's this social dominance line, because that's measuring the percentage of the pie of all of the crypto discussions that are going on, how much of that is being taken up by Binance Coin. And it's still up at about 4% when it's normally, before this rally, it's sitting at about half a percentage point of that piece of the pie. So you're talking about 8 to 10 times more discussion than normal for the number 3 market cap right now.
Wow. Yeah, I look, even myself from a social perspective on X, we had to post about BNB, couldn't ignore it. It was just doing some incredible stuff. What about XRP MVRV?
So XRPs is looking good on the short term. There's definitely an opportunity forming where it's at about -5%. Like I said, it's taken quite a beating going back to mid-July. So the retail mood has soured quite a bit. Understandably, considering the average returns for short-term traders are -5. The long-term still at about +16 because of this, right? So this is the June to early to mid-July, actually late June all the way to late July. It was just on an absolute tear. So we're still seeing the profits slowly regress to the mean here over the past couple months, but +16% isn't too scary anymore. I certainly see some justification to call this a buy zone. Like I said, ultimately you want to have something, if I zoom out, I think there was a moment way back here. Yeah. So if you look all the way back in October of 2024, about a year ago, you see how they were both well below zero together. And all of a sudden, the people who were buying while it was super low, that MVRV, they get rewarded with a 4x, almost 5x over the next month and a half. So that's what you're looking for, is the ideal buy zone. But this certainly could be a lot worse than it is right now.
Yeah. And then, that move you highlighted in June, I think that's the one that took us a little bit past the all-time high. So it was super overheated. So it makes sense what's happening now.
Yeah, I see it way up at 364. Might have gone a few cents higher than that. XRP experts would know better than me, but the math says we're in an okay spot. Probably better for XRP than we are for Bitcoin and Ethereum, just purely based on the mathematical returns of your peer traders that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about Solana? I know we don't have MVRV on that, but sentiment and things along those lines.
Let's see how the mood has been for Solana. That's a good question. Yeah, so it's kind of lukewarm. Maybe, I mean, I'll take off this part over here because there were a lot of bots going on we've talked about on previous calls. Mm-hmm. So let's just look at the last 2-ish months or so. And it is creeping up a little on average, this gold line here. I don't see anything too special indicating that people are overly euphoric or overly bearish in any way. It's just kind of day to day. Sometimes people are excited about it. Sometimes they get a little bit sour. You can see this one was probably related to this mini drop of about 6%. But, even just this one day rally here, you get the sentiment coming back up high. But Solana is looking kind of just under the radar with day to day sentiment fluctuating up and down.
Yeah. And, as we talked about before, all these coins have their day in the sun. And I think sometimes people don't realize the rotational liquidity, what the market makers, the whales are doing. And they see maybe their coin is not moving. Let's say they're Solana holding it. Oh my God, BNB is pumping. That means Solana is dead. It's like, no, it's just rotation. You just got to be patient and you got to monitor.
It's all rotation.
Yeah. And you got to monitor the sentiment and like things like MVRV to see where you're at. And then you can get an approximation of what's going to come next.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much of it is just getting in on the ground floor when nobody's paying attention to it, like Ethereum in the beginning of the year. But you do see that, on our social trends page, BNB is number one, understandably. Solana is still at number two, which is fascinating to me because the sentiment is kind of just, fluctuating up and down. But it says there's some active moderation controversies on the Solana subreddit, frequent mentions in crypto trading, project launches related to the Solana blockchain, and significant developments such as the launch of the world's first Solana ETF with staking by Fonte Capital. So I think ETF hype is going to continue to have Solana live and die on it until it's confirmed.
Very interesting. Good stuff, Brian. Now that you're back and, we're in the midst of Q4 a bit here, maybe we're going to see our next few episodes or 4 episodes or so are going to be very interesting if this rally continues and we go into the parabolic phase. That would be very
interesting. I mean, one thing's for sure. I don't think the final stretch of this year is going to be boring. Right now, if all things align and we don't get any major shakeups, I think it's going to be a good end of the year. And I'm excited to see how it plays out with you every couple of weeks here.
Absolutely. Good stuff, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Talk to you soon.